December 14th, 1943. The winter sky over Europe was the color of a dying ghost, pale and cold, with clouds stretched thin like old paper that had seen too much history. Beneath that sky, two young men, strangers, enemies by uniform, brothers by fate, flew through a war neither fully understood. One, an American bomber pilot named Edward Miller, barely 21, gripping the controls of his B-17 Flying Fortress with trembling, frostbitten fingers. The other, Hans Kappel, a German Luftwaffe fighter ace, known for precision and silence. Cutting through the air in his Messerschmitt like a blade, they were born oceans apart, raised to believe the other was a threat to everything they loved. But war, in all its cruel arithmetic, had a way of reshaping enemies into reflections. Edward never imagined he would remember the metallic taste of fear more vividly than the smell of home. His bomber crew were boys disguised as soldiers, holding cigarette lighters like talismans. The mission brief had been simple on paper: strike an industrial target deep inside Germany. Cripple the Nazi war machine, yet every man in the briefing hall knew that simple was just a word officers said to steady nerves. Intelligence whispered of hidden anti-aircraft nests, radar-guided flak, experimental Luftwaffe squadrons fueled by desperation. By 1943, Germany was bleeding. Cornered animals bite hardest. Unknown to the young crew, beneath those factories lay something darker. Secret research chambers where captured scientists worked under SS command, experimenting in radio wave interference to jam Allied navigation, a precursor to technologies that would shape decades yet to come. The Allies suspected, but proof was a ghost. Scattered behind rumors and coded intercepts, the B-17 engines roared like wounded lions as they crossed into enemy airspace. Formation tight, fear tighter. Below, the world was winter white, silent, deceptively peaceful. Edward watched snow-covered hills roll beneath him like the back of some ancient creature. Somewhere down their mothers pressed photographs against their chests. Children hid in basements, soldiers prayed under breath. War wasn't just battles, it was the quiet spaces in between, where humanity trembled. Every pilot knew unseen eyes tracked them. German radar bunkers hidden under disguised barns, trees hollowed out to house communication relays, entire villages evacuated to mask VU weapon assembly lines. The war was not just land and sky, but a chessboard of shadows. The first explosion hit their formation without warning. A black blossom of flak erupted near the left wing, rattling the fuselage until teeth chattered. The radio crackled with panic, someone screaming coordinates, someone else coughing blood. Edward's heartbeat kept time with the anti-aircraft barrage. Metal fragments pierced the hull like angry bees. He could smell burning oil, hear the metallic weep of tearing aluminum. They were too deep to turn back. Orders said, push forward. Orders did not account for fear. Then came the fighters. Hans Kappel had launched at dawn from a half-frozen airfield, one of hundreds built deep in forests to evade Allied reconnaissance. From above, they looked like farmland, but beneath camouflage nets hid engineers, ammunition stores, experimental aircraft fueled by last hopes of Reich victory. Hans had grown weary of propaganda speeches and victory posters plastered over bombed-out streets. He knew Germany was losing. The faces of fallen comrades haunted him more than any enemy plane. Yet he flew, because duty demanded it, because desertion meant death, because he still believed desperately that maybe one act of courage could change the tide of a war too large for human hands. He spotted the bombers as black silhouettes against the pale sky, slow, heavy, vulnerable. Like hunters surrounding an old beast, German fighters formed attack patterns taught through ruthless training. They dove with sun at their backs, invisible until tracers lit the air like angry comets. The dogfight erupted, a dance of death, close enough to see the whites of enemy eyes. Edward saw Messerschmitts slicing through bomber defense like sharks in a bloodied sea. Turrets rattled, gunners shouting bearings, every second stolen from death. Edward's co-pilot, Marcus, a Tennessee farm boy who loved to carve birds from wood, slumped forward after a round pierced the cockpit glass. Blood spread warm across Edward's gloves. He wanted to scream, but the war gave no space for screams. A burst of fire tore through Engine 3. Flames trailed behind them like the tail of a dying meteor. The aircraft jolted downward, and for a moment, Edward believed it was over. But he pulled harder than he ever had, dragging the crippled bomber back into a climb, refusing to fall. Below him, the earth waited like open grave. Above him, fate was rewriting itself. Hans closed in behind the flaming bomber, machine guns ready. Through his canopy, he saw chaos, smoke, shattered metal, men injured and terrified. He could end it with a short burst. One pull of the trigger, one simple act that war demanded, but something stalled his finger. Maybe it was the sight of the wounded co-pilot. Maybe it was exhaustion from too many kills. Or maybe, deep inside, he remembered watching his own brother leave for the Eastern Front and never return. The human heart rebels in strange ways. He eased off his attack, flying parallel instead of behind. The bomber was dying already. He could have left it. Instead, like a ghost escorting a lost soul, Hans stayed with them, signaling with wings east, away from heavy flak, toward a possible landing field beyond the river. Edward's crew stared through shattered glass, unable to comprehend. Why would an enemy guide them instead of finish them? No officer manual prepared them for mercy. The bomber glided lower, engine coughing like an old man. Edward fought controls with blood-slippery hands. Snowfields stretched ahead, rough, uneven, but open. It was their only chance. The landing was less a descent and more a controlled crash. Metal screamed against frozen earth. The bomber skidded, broke, tore apart like paper. When everything stopped, silence returned, heavy, unreal. Edward stood in wreckage alive, shaking, ears ringing like church bells after war. Most of his crew survived. Marcus did not. His eyes still open, staring at clouds he would never touch again. Hans circled once overhead. In another world, he might have landed nearby and offered help. But German patrols were incoming. He tipped his wings a final silent farewell before disappearing like a phantom into white sky. Edward watched until the speck vanished. The image would live in his memory longer than the war itself. The surviving crew were captured within hours, surrounded by Wehrmacht soldiers moving with mechanical caution. They were marched through snow, hands above heads, boots sinking into cold that bit through bone. Prisoner of war camps were distant rumors, half-truths passed by pilots over smoky barracks conversations. No one ever spoke of what happened inside secret facilities controlled by the SS. Edward wondered which fate awaited them. They expected harsh captivity, but what they were about to witness belonged to the hidden pages of World War. Two stories historians later unearthed, only through declassified archives. The men were transported under heavy guard, not to a standard POW camp, but to a research center concealed beneath a monastery in Bavaria, where interrogators worked under a division of German intelligence, obsessed with decoding Allied aerial strategy. Here, prisoners were not only questioned, they were observed, dissected psychologically, tested against misinformation and fear. The goal was subtle: unravel Allied tactics by breaking morale, by bending truth like heated metal. Psychological warfare, though rarely spoken of publicly, became a silent weapon. Edward endured nights under blinding lamps, interrogators asking for formation routes, radio frequencies, target priorities. He resisted, not through courage alone, but through something stranger. He could not forget the German pilot who spared him. Hate refused to settle. The officers noticed his distant look and misread it as despair. They didn't know it was confusion, the kind that rewires a man's soul. Some guards showed brutality without hesitation. Others, young, exhausted conscripts, slipped extra bread when no one looked. War was never pure black or white. It was gray fog where morality drowned. Months passed. Rumors spread among prisoners of Allied forces pushing closer, of secret Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park deciphering complex ciphers once believed unbreakable, of double agents feeding false intel into Nazi command. Edward learned whispers of Operation Cockpit, raids targeting Japanese communications, and Operation Fortitude, the grand deception using inflatable tanks and fake radio chatter to mislead German intelligence before D-Day. The war was not just guns, it was ghosts of information. Lies shaped battles. Shadows shaped truth. One night, during a forced transfer as Allied forces advanced, Edward and dozens of POs were loaded onto a train headed deeper into Germany. Snow fell harder now, war's final winter. Somewhere near the Austrian border, an Allied air raid struck the tracks. Chaos erupted, explosions painting the night orange, guards scattered, prisoners fled into woods. Edward ran until his lungs burned ice. For days he hid among pines, surviving on snowmelt and stolen potatoes. He wandered delirious until he reached a farmhouse near a river where an old woman risked everything to shelter him. She had lost her son on the Eastern Front. War had taken too much from her already. She fed Edward, gave him clothes, directions toward advancing Allied lines. Humans can be cruel, but they can also save strangers. When American infantry finally found him, skeleton thin but alive, Edward wept not only from relief but from memory of that silent Messerschmitt guiding him. Back home, he married, raised children, became a quiet man who flinched at fireworks. He never forgot Marcus. Never forgot the monastery. Never forgot that mercy can come from unexpected wings. Across the ocean, in a fractured post-war Germany, Hans Capel returned to a homeland unrecognizable. Cities lay in ruins, families scattered like ash. He hid his Luftwaffe past for years, fearing reprisals. He worked in a factory, then as a mechanic, hands stained with oil instead of war. At night he dreamt of burning skies and a bomber limping through snow. Sometimes he wondered if those men survived. Sometimes he wished to know. But time, like war, buries answers. Years turned into decades. History moved forward, yet the scars of 1943 remained like ghosts in both men. By 1970s, researchers began collecting forgotten testimonies from veterans. Building archives of the unspoken war, stories of mercy, unlikely truces, football matches between enemies during ceasefires, pilots escorting damaged aircraft instead of killing them. Strange truths emerged that some German ace pilots preferred crippling engines rather than killing crews, believing war should be honorable. That Allied flyers dropped leaflets warning civilians before bombing runs. That within conflict lived flickers of humanity. Edward, already a grandfather, told his family about the German pilot who spared him. They encouraged him to search, though he believed it impossible. Yet fate enjoys improbable reunions. A historian researching Luftwaffe squadron records noticed a filed mission report from December 14, 1943, describing a pilot who claimed to escort damaged bomber away from heavy flak to reduce unnecessary death. The historian contacted veterans. One name surfaced: Hans Capel. In 2022, to 79 years after that winter sky, Edward, now 99, frail yet sharp-eyed, was brought to Germany with the help of a veterans' reconciliation program. In a small town hall smelling faintly of old books and pine polish, two men entered from opposite doors. Edward with a cane, Hans with trembling hands. They approached slowly, like echoes seeking source. When they finally stood face to face, neither spoke immediately. There are moments where language collapses under the weight of memory. Edward raised a shaking hand. Hans reached for it, as though touching a piece of time itself. Two men who once tried to kill each other embraced instead. The room fell silent. Reporters called it heartwarming, miraculous, proof of humanity. But beneath smiles lay something deeper. The haunting reality that war shapes us long after ceasefire. Edward asked Hans why he spared the bomber. Hans answered that he saw a wounded man and could not pull the trigger. Edward whispered, voice breaking, "You saved me. You saved us." Hans replied, "Maybe you saved me too. If I had killed you, I would never have forgiven myself." They talked for hours, sharing memories like puzzle pieces, completing a story no history book recorded. Hans described the day he received news his brother died in Stalingrad. Edward spoke of nightmares and empty coffins returned home. They learned they both kept old photographs, one of a bomber crew smiling before takeoff, one of fighter pilots lounging beside aircraft, unaware history would swallow them as evening fell. Edward's granddaughter asked if they regretted anything. Both men grew quiet. Edward finally said, "I regret the boys who never came home." Hans nodded, eyes wet. "I regret we thought we were enemies." Outside, snow fell softly, the same snow from 1943. It seemed covering wounds the world never fully healed. History tends to spotlight battles, generals, victories. But real war lives in moments like this. A German ace refusing to fire. An American pilot remembering kindness through decades. Two old men discovering peace long after politics stopped caring. The documentary camera lingered on their hands. Clasped together. Skin fragile, veins like blue rivers carrying lifetimes. Viewers watching decades later would feel something heavy. Not sadness alone, but awareness. Awareness that wars are started by orders, but shaped by individuals. That within bloodshed, humanity flickers like a candle refusing to die. That the past reveals secrets when we dare dig beneath official narratives. Their meeting sparked new research. Historians revisited forgotten archives, uncovering intelligence memos referencing experiments in psychological interrogation at Bavarian monasteries, once sealed under top-secret classification. They found photographs of radar interference prototypes later influencing Cold War signal jamming. Decrypted communications revealed that Luftwaffe pilots were instructed near war's end to conserve ammunition and engage selectively. A silent acknowledgement of approaching defeat. The truth was never simple. World War II was not only fought in trenches and skies, but in laboratories, basements, radio towers, and mines. Edward and Hans met twice more before age claimed them. Their final handshake lasted long, as though they feared letting go would unravel time again. When Edward passed away months later, Hans sent a single rose to the funeral, white for peace. When Hans died the following winter, Edward's family sent a folded American flag to Germany. Their story spread quietly, shared in schools, museums, whispered across online forums dedicated to war mysteries. Not a tale of battle, but of soul. What remains now is not smoke or steel, but message that war, for all its noise, is shaped by silent moments. A pilot choosing mercy, a prisoner choosing hope. A stranger choosing kindness in a farmhouse by the river. The hidden sides of World War II are not only intelligence operations or secret weapons, but the unseen humanity beneath uniforms. And perhaps if history has ghosts, they look like two planes gliding through a winter sky in 1943, one guiding, one surviving, destined to meet.